I'm here with Professor Jean-Pierre Cabestan and Jennifer Joy in a Q&A discussion about Taiwan and Somaliland. So I'd like to first introduce our two guests for today. Our first guest is Professor Jean-Pierre Cabestan, who is a senior fellow at the French National Center for Scientific Research and research professor of political science at Hong Kong Baptist University. He recently published an article in The Diplomat titled "The Somaliland Connection: Taiwan's Return to Africa" on September 2nd, 2021. This article kind of prompted the reason for this Q&A. We'll discuss the article a little bit further, but we're going to leave a link to that article in the description below. So go ahead and click on that and read that when you have a minute. The other guest for today is actually someone who is an integral part of our Taiwan Studies program. This is Jennifer Joy. She's an MA graduate of the Jackson School of International Studies here at the University of Washington and a specialist on East Africa and Taiwan. She wrote her MA thesis titled "Somaliland and Taiwan: Unrecognized Sovereignty and Patron-Client State Relations," just finished this year. And as I mentioned, she is the program coordinator for our Taiwan Studies program. So we're very happy to have both Professor Cabestan and Jennifer able to join us for this Q&A today. So I'll get right into it. I want to ask the first question to both Jean-Pierre and Jennifer, and we're going to do a bit of a mixed Q&A format where I'll be asking some of the questions, Jennifer will ask some questions, but Jennifer will also be answering some of these questions. So this first question is from me to both Jean-Pierre and to Jen. What is Somaliland, and why is it in recent headlines with Taiwan? What's important about it, and why does it matter for Taiwan?
All right, should I start? Well, thank you first of all, James and Jennifer, for inviting me to this show. I'm very excited to talk about a country, Somaliland, which I visited rather briefly, actually, in August 2021 for my work on China-Africa relations and also the Taiwan dimension in this relationship. Now, what is Somaliland? It's a de facto state which has been independent for exactly 30 years, since 1991. First of all, it was a British colony until 1960. It was independent for 5 days in late July 1960, but decided to merge with Somalia, which was originally an Italian colony, which capital city is Mogadishu. And since August 1960 all the way to 91, they were forming just one country. Because of the civil war, the Siad Barre, Somalia president's repression of Somaliland decided to become independent in 1991. Now, Somaliland has not been recognized as a nation state by the international community because of various reasons, the main one being the opposition of the African Union to any partition of any nation in Africa. African countries have inherited the boundaries of the colonial times, and it's always been a principle of the African Union to keep those boundaries as much as possible. Of course, you have other examples of partition, like one of the recent ones is South Sudan, as you know, for 10 years now. But Somaliland has been a successful de facto state for 30 years and has tried to de-isolate itself in connecting with various nations around the world, including a year ago, Taiwan. And that's how things started with Taiwan, which has something in common with Somaliland to be recognized by the international community. And two de facto states here have decided to work together and to cooperate.
Anything to add, Jennifer?
Sure. I think Jean-Pierre covered it really well. I would add that, you know, Somaliland, for those of our listeners that don't know, it is in the most northern section of what is internationally recognized as Somalia. and for its relevance to how it ties with Taiwan. In one way, you could view Somaliland as a peer in that it is, like Taiwan, stuck in this conundrum of being internationally non-recognized as a sovereign state. Although, like Taiwan, it has its own currency, its own flag, national anthem, telecommunications infrastructure, anything that you might routinely think of as a state. And not only is Somaliland could be considered as a peer to Taiwan, stuck in this sort of nebulous zone, but most recently it is Taiwan's most recent sort of diplomatic ally in the African continent, where other than Somaliland, Taiwan really only has ties to the small country of Eswatini.
I would add something about the location of Somaliland, since Jennifer mentioned it briefly. It's located in the Horn of Africa. It's a very important part of Africa, close to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, close to the Djibouti bases, including China base there now. And it has also a very important port, which is Berbera, which is a direct competitor of Djibouti. And for the neighboring countries, particularly Ethiopia, Somaliland is an important connection to the Gulf of Aden, to shipping, exports and imports. So I think it's an important location for the Horn of Africa and for East Africa in general.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Pierre and Jennifer. Jennifer, I think you will ask the next question. Is that right?
I do, that's right. Jean-Pierre, you visited Somaliland for about 1 week in August. Can you please tell us why you went, what it was like, and what were the notable things you observed while being there?
Well, what triggered my interest, of course, was Taiwan. I've been a student of Taiwan for many years. I've looked at what Taiwan has been doing in Africa, in various parts of Africa. I went to a few years ago when Taiwan still had diplomatic relations with Gambia. I went to Gambia. Later, I went to Burkina Faso, and I wrote an article on Burkina Faso-Taiwan relations before they cut diplomatic relations because of Chinese pressure in 2017. So I've looked at the way Taiwan has been developing cooperation programs, and also public diplomacy in Africa, and because I've myself been interested in what the connection between China and Africa, and also Taiwan-China competition in Africa. Now, as Jennifer mentioned, now it's coming to sort of a close, in the sense that only Eswatini still has relations with Taiwan, but with the Somaliland, actually, that's why hence the title of my article is a kind of a return of Taiwan to Africa, and establishing the Taiwan Representation Office in Somaliland, Taiwan 代表处 in Chinese. I think it's a way for Taiwan to come back and also develop relations with all the neighboring countries of Somaliland, including Ethiopia, including Kenya, including other countries like South Sudan and Uganda as well. So I think it's that's what triggered my interest, to be short.
If I could ask a quick follow-up question to that, Jean-Pierre, do you see Somaliland as being more unique compared to Eswatini or Gambia or Burkina Faso? I mean, historically, Taiwan's relations with the Horn of Africa have been weaker than West Africa, where Gambia and Burkina Faso are.
Well, there are a number of reasons for Somaliland to be in need for relations. The one is that it's not well recognized as a nation state, in spite of the fact that it meets all the requirements of the nation state according to the Montevideo Convention, as we know, and vice versa. Taiwan was looking for potential diplomatic allies and partners in Africa. Taiwan is trying also to set up representation offices around the world. There was an attempt to set up such a representation in Guyana, which failed a year ago. Much more recently, Taiwan has been more successful with Lithuania in Eastern Europe, and where a Taiwanese representation office was set up not too long ago. And so that's why I think it's interesting to see how Taiwan is also trying to reach out other countries. in establishing meaningful political relations. Now, it's short of diplomatic relations. Actually, what Taiwan has set up in Somaliland is a highly political or highly official relationship, 高度政治化 or 高度官员化的关系. So, and it's I think very important because it's a way of going around the One China policy, which many countries have adopted because of China pressure, and to exist and to cooperate with other countries. So for Somaliland, I think Taiwan is an important partner, which allows to have a better international status. It doesn't mean that Somaliland is isolated, actually. Somaliland has meaningful relations and de facto relations with all its neighboring countries, including Ethiopia, Kenya, Djibouti, and the Arab Emirates, United Emirates, which is an important partner of Somaliland as well. Now, Turkey has a big consulate there, and the British and the Danes have also representative offices. So it's not isolated, and it's cooperating with the UN agencies, which have offices also on the ground, including the WHO, World Health Organization. So it exists, and I would add to that even at the commercial level, Somaliland has had for many years links with mainland China, importing goods and exporting goods to mainland China. Some Chinese delegation went to Somaliland 10 years ago. Some Somaliland commercial delegations also visited China some time ago. But China, of course, has official links with Mogadishu and the Republic of Somalia, and we may come back to that, but was not willing to have any official relation with Somaliland for that reason.
Yeah, thank you, Jean-Pierre. So this is a good segue to my next question, which is for Jen. So Jen, in addition to be trained in Taiwan studies, you're also an East Africa expert. Could you tell us why Somaliland is unique in the African context, which Jean-Pierre has touched on already, but if you could tell us a little bit more about that, and also what might this relationship with Taiwan mean to Somaliland? Is it something special for them?
Sure. Thank you, James. Well, I think for Somaliland's unique position in the region, there are a few ways that you can view it. One is that there are other secessionist movements in the Horn which have been more successful than Somaliland, but less successful than Somaliland in a different way. So we have South Sudan and Sudan, or we have Eritrea and Ethiopia. South Sudan and Eritrea both received independence, but they have not fared well post-independence, versus Somaliland is in a different position, but they have operated quite successfully, right? So that is a unique situation that's going on. Another unique situation with Somaliland is that internationally speaking, Somaliland will be seen as tied to Somalia. However, it has been operating at a much more sort of peaceful manner than Somalia has been able to do for the past number of years. While I was doing my research for my thesis, I read this book by Sarah Phillips titled When There Was No Aid, and she offered a specific statistic that was really impressive, which is that since 1996, a few years post-Somaliland unilaterally declaring independence, since 1996, Somaliland has suffered 1% of fatalities from violent conflict than the rest of Somalia. So clearly Somaliland is doing something different, while Somalia has had dozens of internationally supported and funded peace conferences. So there's the question of how are they doing this and what are they doing? And I think lastly, Jean-Pierre has already touched on this, but Somaliland is unique and very important due to its sort of geopolitical position. They have the port of Berbera, which is a very major economic hub, which Ethiopia needs to access water since it became a landlocked country with the loss of Eritrea. It's very close to the Arabian Peninsula. You can hit a baseball to Yemen. So it gets sucked into the orbit of the Middle East and its own geopolitics and what its major powers are doing. but also it lies at the mouth of the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. So it's on this very major economic corridor as well. So just positionally, Somaliland is sort of primed to be an important and unique contributor to the region. And as for what this development Taiwan brings to Somaliland, as Jean-Pierre has said, Somaliland has long been known to regional players. It has very frequent and regular contact with all of the countries in the region. But this is really an extension to being on the international stage, whereas they're reaching to a very distant country, Taiwan. And if nothing else, at least they're getting people talking about Somaliland.
Thank you, Jennifer. So my next question is about the People's Republic of China. How does the PRC play into this? Does Somaliland fear PRC retaliation for its actions? And Jean-Pierre already mentioned the delegation 10 years ago, so maybe we could start with Jean-Pierre and then Jennifer can join in.
Of course, China has been pretty unhappy to see Somaliland establishing this high-level relationship with Taiwan a year ago in July 2020, and has tried to disrupt the relationship in making a lot of, well, exerting a lot of pressure on Somaliland, but also trying to visit the country and send delegation there, and making proposal to the Somaliland government in order to put an end to this relationship. The major proposal made by the Chinese delegates was to establish a liaison office, and that was quite interesting in terms of proposal. Now, for people who still remember the early 70s, that exactly the kind of representation the US and China agreed upon after Nixon's trip to China is to establish liaison office in Beijing and Washington until full normalization can take place. So that's an interesting proposal. And there was a fear that actually the Somaliland Authority will give in, you know, because the Chinese have deep pockets, and they would have made also, I guess, attractive financial proposals. Now, up to now, I have to say those attempts have not been successful. I think Taiwan has managed to cultivate a very fruitful and friendly relationship with the Somaliland authorities. They're well established in Hargeisa, the capital city of Somaliland. They have projects around, you know, agricultural projects, health projects, and so on. We can come back to that later. And I have to say the relationship is in pretty good shape. So that doesn't mean that China is not present on the ground. And as I mentioned in my article, when I traveled to Berbera to visit the DP port, which is a port modernized by DP World, which is a big company based in the Emirates, based in Dubai actually. And I had an interview with the CEO of DP Port Berbera, Thai national, very nice guy. And I was staying in an hotel where I bumped into, I think, a dozen Chinese engineers and technicians, so young chaps actually. So I talked to them, and they told me, well, yes, we work for Zhenhua, these big, you know, container crane companies, which control a large chunk of the world market of container cranes, and they're there to help, you know, maintaining the cranes, because and maybe they will be involved in the another additional extension of the harbor if this extension takes place. So the Chinese in a way are there, but very few actually. The Chinese presence in Somaliland is pretty light, I would say. There was a Chinese restaurant in Hargeisa which had to close down because of lack of clients, I guess, a year ago. So, but the Chinese are based in Mogadishu, and they are keeping a close eye on Somaliland, and of course I'm happy with that relationship. So the big question is, you know, how long can Taiwan keep that relationship on track, and whether down the road there will be stronger pressure exerted by China, which would put an end to it. So for the time being, my answer would be negative. I don't think that China has been successful, but we'll see in the future whether that can be kept as it is today.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
Not much. I mean, I think Jean-Pierre covered it pretty well. I think any person, much less state that watches the news, understands that anybody that interacts with Taiwan in a friendly manner will have the CCP in close pursuit afterwards. You know, China can be very persuasive, whether that be through military intimidation or through sort of financial appeal. And checkbook diplomacy has certainly been a part of this history in the continent of Africa in the past, with various African countries switching recognition between Taipei or Beijing and receiving tens of millions of dollars each time. So I do think it is a question of how Taiwan manages this relationship and what decisions Somaliland will make in the future.
Yeah, I'm aware of, you know, I think Burkina Faso was a good example of a nation that had switched back and forth from Taiwan and the PRC, and using each switch as a means to increase leverage in its financial relationships. Do we see Somaliland possibly pursuing this route? And if not, why not? I'm just curious what the maybe the non-financial considerations are for Somaliland.
Well, there are a number of factors which have made so far the Somaliland-Taiwan connection pretty strong and stable. I would say, first of all, I think there's a good team of professional Taiwanese diplomats based in Gaza, headed by former ambassador I'm sorry, his name is Lo Jianhua. And the whole team is, including some Arabic speakers, is pretty professional. The second thing is they have a good connection with the government, with the de facto, the acting Prime Minister, Liban Yusuf Osman, who is a very dynamic young official. And they've been good at cultivating those links. The third factor is the fact that both countries are democracies. And that's has been very much promoted by Taiwan and also by the Somaliland side. Of course, we can make some reservations about how democratic Somaliland is. It is democratic in the sense you have multi-party elections. Everybody, including women, can vote. Of course, we can deplore the lack of women's representation among the MPs. There's just one minister who is a woman. But for the region, I think it's pretty good. And it's pretty transparent. There's been a change of government, a change of majority. And it's a big contrast with the rest of the region, particularly with Somalia, which has been torn apart by civil war, by the Al-Shabaab terrorist groups, and so on. And Somaliland is mainly really peaceful for most of its and stable and safe on most of its territory. So now there's also shared interest in developing these countries' relation with Ethiopia, what has been called the Berbera Corridor, and it's not only the port but also the road to the Ethiopian border, and that's something which has been developed by DP World as well, the Dubai company I mentioned earlier. And I think both Somaliland and Taiwan have an interest in working together on many economic projects which have to do with the development of Berbera. I think Taiwanese have organized an expo not long ago, we'll organize in November an expo in Berbera in order to attract more Taiwanese investments. Now, of course, the final thing is the development projects put together by the Taiwanese government in agriculture and in health and training. And those projects have been pretty successful, even if by their side they are not, huge. But Somaliland is not a huge country. Its population is just under 6 million. Even the country is vast. I mean, in terms of size, it's not a very populated country. So in a way, small is beautiful, and small countries can cooperate and do meaningful things together.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Pierre. This is a good segue to my last and final question, which I'd like to ask you, Jean-Pierre. So now with Somaliland, as you've already remarked, with Somaliland and now Lithuania using the term Taiwan in its official term, the Taiwan Representative Office, instead of the older Republic of China, do you see this shift expanding to other countries in the future? Or is Somaliland and now Lithuania are the unique cases? And what might this mean for Taiwan's future diplomacy efforts with the rest of the world?
We're just after double 10, Jean-Pierre. If you noticed President Taiwan's speech at the double 10 celebration, the National Day, she mentioned, of course, that it was the 110th anniversary of the Republic of China. But she also mentioned that the ROC, the Republic of China, has been on Taiwan for 72 years. So now the Taiwanese government's ambition or new narrative is to emphasize these 72 years of Taiwanized, if I may say, ROC. So the Republic of China on Taiwan, and that's the new identity of the ROC. Which is to be a distinct jurisdiction located on Taiwan. So hence the promotion of Taiwan around the world as the name of the country more than the ROC. And you've seen that when the passports were changed not too long ago. Now the question is whether other countries can accept that kind of name. And there's been a lot of discussions in Europe, but also in Northern America about changing the name of the Taiwanese offices around the world, and the TECRO should it be renamed Taiwan Representative Office, because the TECRO is Taipei Representative Economic and Cultural Office, and there may be other countries in Europe who will be tempted to change the name of the Taiwanese representation. But I don't know how many. And I think the important signal will probably come from the European Union itself, from the European Commission. If the European Union decides to change and accept a new name for Taiwan's representation, that may trigger a kind of domino effect in the European Union, and convince other countries to do the same.
Do you see Somaliland and Lithuania as potentially providing this entry point? Is it the first domino to fall, and then after that, then the European Commission, or is it still kind of an uphill battle for Taiwan?
I think it's an uphill battle. To be frank with you, because of the fierce reactions of China after Lithuania, decided to change the name of the Taiwanese office and to a permanent office actually in Taipei, and to let the Taiwanese have an office in Vilnius, the capital city of Lithuania. So and the cost may be too high. Because China has been now very much inclined to take sanctions to force the other country to pay a price for what they're doing, which is detrimental to China's interest in the view of Beijing. So we shall see. And that's why I'm inclined to think that it's up to the European Union, which is in a much stronger position, bargaining position with Beijing, to make the first step in order to convince other countries to do the same. Maybe some small countries like the Czech Republic, or even bigger countries like Poland, which are less dependent upon China in terms of trade and investments, may be tempted to do the same. But we shall see. Those are still, I would say, exceptions to the rule, which is to keep the current name Taipei Representative Office.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Pierre. Jennifer, any last items to add?
No, I don't think so. Jean-Pierre has covered that very nicely.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank you both, Professor Jean-Pierre Cabestan and Jennifer Joy, for your time today talking about Somaliland and Taiwan.